I'm reading this morning from the Gospel according to St. Mark, the 8th chapter, verses 27 through 38. Because my eyes are getting old, I've got to pop mine. Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they answered him, "John the Baptist, and others Elijah, and still others one of the prophets." He asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" And Peter answered him, "You are the Messiah." And he sternly ordered them not to tell anyone about him. Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said all of this quite openly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." He called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If you want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it. And those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Those who are ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels." Aristotle was a Greek philosopher. I suspect most of you, at least, if you didn't take a philosophy class, at least heard the name Aristotle before. And he had a belief in a theory that if you dropped an object that was heavier than another object from a height, that the heavier object would fall to the ground first. Now remember that Aristotle was considered one of the great thinkers of his time, one of the most intelligent people to have lived. That one heavy and one light, and they would both fall at the same time. Now, of course, it would have been easy to test that out, because someone could have taken a heavy object and a light object to the top of some tall place and dropped them off to see what would happen. But no one did. Not least until about 2,000 years after Aristotle's death. Legend has it, at least as told by my 8th grade science teacher, Jim Gutman, that in 1589, Galileo, another name you might be familiar with, summoned a group of learned professors together. And he asked them to stand at the base of the Leaning Tower of Pisa. And then he climbed to the top of the Leaning Tower of Pisa with a 10-pound and a 1-pound weight. He dropped them off, and they landed at the same time. But the power of belief that had been around for so long was so strong that even though the professors saw it with their own eyes, they continued to believe that Aristotle was correct and wouldn't change any of the writings or rules of physics. It seems to me that's an illustration that's perfect for our world today. I mean, you can have someone who has a diseased liver or cancerous lungs and show that information to people, and yet people still abuse alcohol and smoke regardless of the facts that are in front of them. Sometimes I wish that we could climb to the top of a tower and push off a 10-pound argument and then a 1-pound argument, and let's see which one would reach the ground first. That would finally prove who's right and who's wrong, right? But I guess I'm reminded that when Galileo did that, no one believed it. Even the authority of the obvious, 2 weights reaching the ground at the same time, the professors did not believe. To me, the problem is also obvious. Most people are going to believe what they have always believed, regardless of the facts. I guess for us, it would be contrary to who we are and how we live to think otherwise. For instance, if you read the scriptures well, you know that life is not about winning. Life is not about winning, but if you're a basketball fan in the month of March, that's going to be pretty hard to convince you that it's not about winning, right? Or if you're a football fan and it's in January, it's going to be hard to convince you that it's not about winning. And on our televisions, you can go and find reality shows like Survivor, The Apprentice, Fear Factor, American Idol, The Voice, The Amazing Race, The Biggest Loser. And while they're all entertaining, they all make us believe that life is all about winning. And in fact, when I was a boy, I believed the mantra that Vince Lombardi, the famous coach of the Green Bay Packers, said. Winning isn't everything, it's the only thing. That's a stark contrast to what Jesus would have us know, that life is not about winning, at least in the ways of this world. Furthermore, life is not about control. Let's say you put 10 chickens in a pen together and spread some feed on the floor. It only takes a few moments before the chickens begin to have a hierarchy in place based on power and control. They determine through some skirmishes they have with the food who's chicken number 1 and who's chicken number 2, all the way down to chicken number 10. The pecking order. Ever heard that before? The pecking order. You put people together in a room and spread a little food on the tables, something similar takes place. You might not hear clucking and pecking, although I've seen that sometimes. But there will be discussions and debates that will establish a pecking order. And we soon assume our worth lies in proportion to our power as defined by how many people and resources we control. Jesus said that you are not created to scratch in dirt with the chickens. In this world, we know that kings and rulers order people around and exercise their authority. But you are not to be like that. The one who rules, according to Jesus, should be the one who also serves. I think that's why Peter struggled so much with what Jesus talked to him about in this conversation. You see, Peter was focused on human things instead of divine things. So when Jesus asked him, "Who do you say that I am?" while Peter was writing saying, "You are the Messiah," once Jesus started talking about these predictions, the first of 3 he does actually in Mark, about suffering and dying and rejection and the resurrection, Peter reacts as any human being would react. He pulls Jesus aside and says, "You may not want to say this, Jesus. Everything's going pretty sweet here. Everything's going well. This might not be the best thing to come up with, telling people that you're going to suffer and be persecuted and rejected and crucified and then resurrected. Why don't you go heal somebody? You haven't done that for a while. Maybe that would be a good thing for you to do. Or maybe drive a demon out. You always get a kick out of driving demons out of people, so maybe you should do that." And Jesus' response to Peter is, "Get behind me, Satan." It's kind of scary to think that these 12 men could be around the company of Jesus day after day for 3 years and still not understand or get it. I wonder, though, if we get it any better than the disciples did. I mean, we've heard it all before. We've read it all before. We've even practiced some of it before, but do we really get it? Life is not about you or me, not about our dreams, about our wishes, our desires, our needs, or our wants. It's about serving God and serving others. You see, according to human life, our life comes first. Period. Now, we might be kind and generous and thoughtful toward other people, but we reserve the right for our personal safety, our personal security, and for our physical comfort. So when Jesus begins to say things to me and you, I mean, in the Bible we're reading him talking to the disciples and the Sadducees and Pharisees, but really he's talking to us through the centuries, right? When we start hearing Jesus say things to us that upset our comfort zone, then we're like Peter. Hey, Jesus, that's kind of cool, that stuff. Why don't we go try to heal somebody or exorcise a demon? Now, we've got to be fair with the Apostle Peter because we have the advantages of being 2,000 some years plus since that time happened, and we can read back and we know that indeed Jesus was persecuted and rejected and crucified and resurrected. You've got to remember, Peter didn't know that, right? What he knew was, as a fisherman, he was hanging out with this guy who had a lot of charisma and was teaching some really good stuff and doing some miracles. And so his perspective of this was a little bit skewed to what we have. Jesus, on the other hand, was well aware of the fact that he was not going to be with them much longer. And so Jesus is teaching his disciples to become leaders for the risk of the gospel. You see, I really think this is a Jesus leadership seminar that's going on during this time. Jesus knows that he's going to have to depend upon his disciples to pick up the load. Or us. Growing up in rural Indiana, I played a lot of games when I was a child. Everything from hide and seek to kick the can to wiffle ball. And as I raised my own children, they also played games. And oftentimes I'd play games with them. One of my favorite was being all-time quarterback and then being the receiver defense, and I just threw it to them, let them beat each other up. Things like Simon Says and Gin Rummy and all types of things. And when I coached for the many years that I coached, there were times that I gave us breaks from the rigorous training that I was asking my young athletes, and we would go play water polo or frisbee, golf, or flag football or some such thing. And now as a grandfather, I'm connected again with the world of children and games. It reminds me of the games that I used to play, of kick the can, and hide and seek, and jump rope. Those times when I was young and carefree, when playing games passed the time and brought me joy and satisfaction in life. I listen to my grandchildren and their friends if they're around and they're rehearsing things like when they're jumping rope and they're reciting the rhymes that go along. They still do the same rhymes we did when we were kids. They still bring smiles to their face and eager participation, being one of the folks that are jumping rope. And even the new electronic games have a fun in their own way. The noises we wouldn't have expected as youth and the displays of lights, in fact, might have scared us. But nonetheless, there's still some fun in those things being around. And I know now that when my family gathers at my house, my children and grandchildren come for a holiday, after we've eaten, usually there's board games strewn across the floor as everybody starts playing games. You want to play this one, you want to play this one, until we move on. What I observed is there's still nothing quite like those old games though. Even today, your children who weren't around when I was a child still love to play hide and seek. They still love to jump rope. And there's nothing quite as challenging or as much fun for a child as playing a good round of follow the leader. Follow the leader is so incredibly democratic because everyone who wants to can participate. It's not one of those games where only a couple people can play. Everybody can be part of it. All you have to do is be able to get to a line and go where the leader goes and do what the leader's doing. How beautiful it is to be on a playground and see a group of small children going up and down the slide, around the sandbox, under the swings, happy to be part of a group on the move. Content to allow their imagination and the imagination of the leader to shape their experiences of play, and perfectly willing to risk getting their clothes and shoes scuffed and a little bit dirty if that's what the leader requires of them in the game. The leader obviously can get them into trouble, or the leader can lead them safely everywhere for an exciting journey through the wonders of the park. Follow the leader, I think, is a lot like life as a Christian. How blessed we are when we truly have leaders who have hearts and minds that are faithful to the servanthood that Jesus requires. On the way to Caesarea Philippi, Jesus asked his disciples a question to determine their fitness as leaders. Who do others say that I am, and who do you say that I am? By the way, the Greek word for you that is used here is actually in the plural case. So that means he was talking to even us followers today. In every generation, this question is being asked. Who do people say that I am? Who do you say that I am? How do you speak of Jesus? What do your words reveal about your faith concerning this Jesus? And perhaps even more important than your words, how do your private and public actions reveal about your convictions concerning Jesus' true identity, Jesus' interest, Jesus' intent for the world that we live in today? People tend to say whatever they feel about Jesus according to their own interpretation. Ministers will say things and talk about being the anointed one, about the suffering rejection and the shame of religious leaders and the crucifixion and the power of death. So Peter's response to these predictions, which are difficult for Peter, are also difficult for us sometimes too. Because we're used to having our own needs met and our expectations fulfilled. So it's difficult when you follow a leader who appears unpopular, uncomfortable, and sometimes uncompromising. According to Mark 8, Peter is able to confess a profound truth. You are the Christ. You are the Messiah. Use the right words, but has trouble with accepting the full implications of what that means. Jesus confronts him, rebukes him, and demands that there might be some danger with his confusion. Get behind me, Satan. These are some of the strongest words in all of Scripture, spoken to a man that Jesus loved with all of his heart. The work of the kingdom of God is serious stuff. And everyone who is baptized into this fellowship with God has to learn to lead, to follow, or get out of the way. In our modern church, like Olive Branch Christian Church, we participate in our own version of follow the leader. Sometimes the work of Christian leaders is focused on training and mentoring and encouraging new leaders. That's why we're always looking for young adults or folks who have not been involved in the past to get them involved so we can train them up. And you who have been doing things for ages can help the ones who have not been learn how to do the things that we do in church. We share leadership so that people will recognize and utilize the gifts of leadership that have been given to them for one kind of leadership or another. And we also follow the leader who liberates our spirits so we can do things that cause us to struggle with injustices to liberate others. One of my favorite theologians is Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He was a professional theologian during the Second World War. Bonhoeffer was at the University of Chicago, but then was living in New York City and could have stayed safely in New York City and lectured and probably done some efforts to try to combat the Nazi tyranny that was happening in Europe, and could have chosen that path to do that. But instead, he went back home to Germany and became a courageous leader of the church's resistance to Nazi Germany and Adolf Hitler. In his book, The Cost of Discipleship, Bonhoeffer shows how his leadership was rooted in the conviction of the tragedy of the cross. That in suffering is a fruit that is an exclusive allegiance to Jesus Christ, he writes. When it comes, it is not an accident, but a necessity. How are we to know what kind of cross is meant for us? Dietrich Bonhoeffer soon found that just a few days before the armistice was signed and Germany surrendered, he was executed and killed. But his indestructible faith to face death as a martyr and secure in the promise that his living was not in vain because he was doing what it was that Jesus had called him to do. I think it would be meaningful for us if after this day of worship here at Olive Branch Christian Church, that the same type of thing would happen in our hearts and in our lives and those of everyone who gathers this morning, that we might all live out our life for the sake of the gospel, of the good news of Jesus Christ. This is the word of God for the people of God, and praise be to God.